Sports, 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 sports.
Hey there, sports fans. Welcome to Sportsball, part of the ESPN crew of podcasts. We talk about sports-related topics, but we focus on you, the fan, and what you like, whether it is a sport, team, athlete, sports-related news, or an event. This week, we are going to be talking about soccer, or football, as it's known all around the world. Look, I don't know a whole lot about soccer, and it's something that I know as a sports fan that I should look to get a little bit more into it. And joining me today is a soccer enthusiast. He played semi-pro soccer. He's one of the co-hosts of the Inside the 90 podcast. So I've got Kyle Dentoni. Was
Beautiful.
was was that okay? Did
That was
I
beautiful. Love
tr
it.
tried my best. So welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure to go on other people's shows and talk some ball. I'm ready for it. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So first, let's start with this. Give us a little bit of your background about soccer because when I kind of shown the bat signal out and was asking for podcast guests, you immediately said, I'd be interested in talking about soccer. And then you kind of went through all the different things that you've done with soccer. So let's just start with that. Where did you start? When did you start playing
Yeah.
soccer and what's kind of kept you in it for this long?
Yeah. So I played since I could walk, essentially. I'm 37 now on a good day. And I played since I could, since I could walk, So and it's always stuck with me. I played, elementary all the way to junior high to high school, up into college, and I played in the Air Force a little bit, and then I actually had the benefit of making semi-pro. I only actually went to one practice in semi-pro because I actually got orders to go to a special school. So essentially, I had to quit the next day, but I made the team, and that's what counts.
Right.
So, but I it's something that I've always it's just something about it that always stuck with me. And if you watch, I watch European ball, the most, the English Premier League or the Prem as they call it, Bundesliga, which is Germany, Serie A, which is Italy, and so on, La Liga, and so on and so forth. So it's a wild atmosphere that just draws you in. It's just nothing about it that I can't. You feel it through the TV,
Mhm.
and I mean, my team, which is Arsenal, they tied or drew the other week, and I was just depressed for the rest of the day. My wife was like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "I should have yelled louder. It could have heard me through the TV. I should have yelled." And it's just little stuff like that, and I don't know what it is. You just don't get that here in the States. I mean, the closest thing we have here in the States is college football, and I love college football. I'm a big college football fan, but we just don't have that here. And it's there's just something about it that just brings you in. You're just captivated, and you just get sucked into the moment. It's another reason why so many other players and enthusiasts, actors, whatever you want to call people, that started to follow the sport and even invest in the sport, such as, if you watch Welcome to Wrexham and some of these other ones, like LeBron James is a partial owner of Liverpool.
Yep.
And, at least he was, and then so on and so forth. And that's just always, stuck with me. And I think that there's something to said that about a sport in this context that helps bring everyone together in so many different age groups and ways of life, black, Jewish, whatever the case is. And then you go to the game and everyone's all together. And I say that you could be like, well, that's like in every sport. Well, yeah,
Not
but
to the same extent that
yeah,
it is
yeah,
in
not to the
soccer.
same extent. Yeah. And, you know, and this is to the extent where, like, if you go and there's upwards of, my math could be wrong on this, but there's upwards of 20 different teams, at least in the in the prem, or not the prem, excuse me, but there's 20 different teams in the upper divisions, you know of the English league. They're all from London.
Mhm.
Do the math on that, right? That's nuts. But if you go to another, if you go to another bar, like if you're in London and you go to a Tottenham bar wearing an Arsenal jersey, you're gonna get jumped or you get thrown out. It's just how it is. And now it might not be that, like now you probably get some, pretty nasty words and might get thrown out. But back in the day, it was the Wild West. And I'm not saying I promote or anything like that. It's kind of just the culture of how it was.
Right.
And that sort of culture and that passion just captures you. And I'm here for it, man. It's just so wow. Look in the picture behind me. This is from the Derby Madonnina, which is AC Milan versus Inter Milan. Essentially, the fans were having flares on the field, and it smoked out the entire stadium, and no one could see. So they had to pause the game until the air cleared. Where does that happen in any other sport? And if you watch games like in Argentina or whatever, Boca Juniors versus River Plate is a nasty rivalry, right? Rangers and Celtic, right? In up north in Scotland is another wild rivalry, or in soccer we call it a derby, and you don't get that, if you get New York Jets, who's the Yankees and the Mets, right?
Yeah.
For baseball reference, it's like you don't get that in that sport. I'm a baseball fan too. I'm not going to take anything away from that, but it's like, where do you get that? It's so much fun, and like I said, I'm here for it.
There is something about soccer that you cannot deny that the tradition and the
Yeah,
pride that the fans have in the game is just unparalleled. You can't you can't match the type of fandom and the fanaticism that people have with soccer. And like you said, with such a concentrated area, just London having so many different teams, it's that would be like if LA had like eight or nine basketball teams. Not, but that's never going to happen because it they've got two right now. It's basically like one and a half right now because the Clippers don't even count. But you're not going to have that in in various other cities around the US because
right.
there's just not enough. It's all about money. Money is very important, but also it's about just fandom as well because in the US there are nine or 10 different sports that have teams in some of these various cities, and you're just not going to get the same level of commitment that you're going to get from people as opposed to what soccer clubs have. So I got to
Yeah,
give soccer a lot of credit for that.
yeah, and so soccer, be politically correct, I'm going to call it football just for the sake
That's
that's what we call it.
all good.
Uh,
Let's switch
uh,
switch it and let's continue to call it football.
so yeah, so in football we have a thing called ultras, 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 which is essentially a type of football fan that is known for very, shall we say, fanatical,
Mhm.
maybe political support. These are the guys that, and they're not all wild. Just historically, they are culturally, but they're not all like crazy, right? They're just historically, they could be politically driven, religious driven, all sorts of stuff. The biggest leagues they're the most popular in is like leagues like in Greece. It is absolutely ridiculous. Greece, Italy, Argentina, Turkey, and these division. It's like these are the guys that bring flares, and they have a you know the closest thing in the MLS that they have to ultras is for the Seattle Sound, or not the Seattle Sounders, but the Portland Timbers, the Timbers Army, which I've been to a handful of Timbers games. Timbers games are awesome. They converted an old baseball stadium into a soccer stadium. Awesome. Timbers Army is fantastic. It really is. But if there's any MLS game to go to, it'd be a Timbers game. And Portland's a pretty city, politics aside, but it's a beautiful city. And if some of these games that I would go to in a heartbeat, but I wouldn't want to mess with the area just because of the ultras. Not because I'm scared. It's just because it's such a different dynamic. It's just, yeah, and it's just watching it, and you can pull videos up on YouTube and just watch soccer ultras, and you'll just see just the chants and the jumping and everything. Like, pull up on Instagram. Argentina is absolutely nuts. And like I said, where in what sport do you now, like, is it what sport do you get that here in the States? Now in other leagues and England, especially in Germany, maybe not Germany, but England, it's much more tame. The legal side of things have definitely cracked down on a lot of that stuff. Some leagues they don't allow like the flares and stuff like that out. Mexico can be pretty rough as well. If you've been following the USA Mexico stories and the
Mhm.
racial chants and everything that's been going on with that, and yeah, I'm here for it. I'm not saying I promote or anything like that. It just adds more fuel to the fire and more love of the game.
Mhm.
You know,
No other sport out there has to worry about riots if a team loses, or, you know, somebody potentially at risk if they don't come home from the World Cup
yeah,
or the Olympics, uh, potentially with the gold or with, as winners. So there is something to be
yeah,
said about that. And one could say that that's a bit extreme. You could make the argument
of
also
course.
that there's a level of passion there, and there's a level of pride that you're just not going to get with literally anything else when it comes to sports. And particularly with football, there we go. I got you there. It's such a global sport when you compare it to something like American football, which they're trying to make it more global, but just because you go and play it in another country doesn't make it a global sport.
Mm.
I think the closest thing, like basketball, I would say basketball, hockey, and baseball are a little closer to global sport, but just not to the extent that football, cricket, or rugby probably is.
Watch basketball. Watch professional basketball in Greece or Turkey. It
Mhm,
is ridiculous.
mhm.
Imagine the atmosphere you have like in a soccer stadium, but in indoors. Like NBA, not even compared. No.
Yeah. So suffice to say, you've been playing soccer, or I'm sorry, you've been playing football for a long time. And
Yeah.
you went semi-pro, and then you also have a soccer apparel company. Is that,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that.
So the apparel company is called 90 Apparel, hence the hat and then
Mhm,
my shirt here. So 90 Apparel was essentially the birth child of kind of what we talked about. It was, how do you harness all this kind of raw passion and the culture, history, and the humor, of course, the humor of the game. Can't take that out. Soccer is football has a very, it has a very humorous side with, the antics some of the players put on and the chants, of course, and all sorts of stuff. But like I said to myself, you know, how do you put this into a brand? And I was like, well, how do you compete with Adidas and Nike and Puma, Skechers now? Skechers is in the soccer space. Skechers have signed, I don't know if people know this, but Skechers have signed Harry Kane, right? Played for Tottenham. Now he plays for Bayern Munich,
mhm.
right? He's a fantastic player, plays for England. Probably one of the best strikers in the world, at least in form. And, he's got a contract with Skechers. Who would have thought? Not Nike or Adidas, but Skechers, you know? And next thing you know, like New Balance. New Balance is breaking on the field. New Balance, New Balance has Bukayo Saka from Arsenal, right? $120 million wonder kid that I think is what 23, and
Mhm.
he's worth 120 mil roughly. And I was like, well, how do you put all this into a brand? And that's what 90 became. And so what I like to do is I want to bring that culture, that history, and that humor to the States here.
Mhm.
And like just funny shirts. Like I have a shirt that says no diving. I have a shirt. I have a shirt that says card collector. It has a yellow card and a red card in the back. And
Mhm.
I have another shirt that says, the magic spray when players get hurt and they get that spray that's up on them.
Right.
Uh, and then, my next ones are going to be, the hand of God, famously a Maradona from I think it was the 78 World Cup, Argentina versus England. You know, Maradona famously used his hands. And the, I think how it happened is that the reporter asked him if he used his hand to score the goal. And he says, well, it must have been the hand of God. And that's how it became the hand. And then obviously you got the 2006 World Cup where, famously Zinedine Zidane headbutted Materazzi. Who's actually the player that's right there in my photo. Yeah, it was in live television. Dude was talking trash about his mom or his sister or something like that. Turn around and decked him. And it's not to, bring awareness or, oh, you're promoting violence. It's like, no, this is about culture. And that was his last moment. That was Zidane's last moment ever professionally as a player because he announced his retirement beforehand, I believe. And that was it. And it was in stoppage time too. Like he just turned around and clocked the dude, and you want to go into other stuff like I think it's Brandy Chastain, the 1996 World Cup, a Women's World Cup here in the States, where she famously took her jersey off.
Yep.
She had this
Yep.
sports brawl heard around the world, is what it was called. The photo was called, or seen around the world, right? You put that on a shirt. I was like, what other brands aren't doing that,
No,
And
they're not.
and so you go to a soccer bar or you go to a USA game and where soccer fans sees you wear that shirt, like, dude, I remember that. That was wild. That was nuts. That's what the brand is about, and that's what it became.
Nice. Well, I will be sure to link it in the show notes so that people, if they want to check it out, definitely do so because you've definitely put a lot of work into it, and we definitely want to support that. So,
Thank you.
congrats on all the success there. So let's let's transition a little bit and let's talk about the game itself. And you said that you're an Arsenal fan. So right off the bat, how is it that out of all the teams out there, how is it that Arsenal is the one that you decided to follow?
I think that what I found interesting about Arsenal, when I got into Arsenal probably in the mid '90s, probably, and this is like high peak, Arsene Wenger era. If you know your soccer history, with the Invincibles, only team in England to ever go undefeated, upwards of was it last year, only team in Europe and all professional divisions to go undefeated. Last year there was another team that made it, and that was Bayer Leverkusen in Germany went undefeated. Only two teams in history to ever do it. But and they had a play they had a number of different players that I think it was just a game I saw come on at my parents' house. But Arsenal, unlike a lot of teams, a lot of teams are named after the city that they're in, that they're
Hmm.
based out of, whether it's Bournemouth,
Liverpool,
which is
yeah.
Liverpool, Chelsea, these are all, different cities or areas or, provinces or whatever you want to call them, areas. Arsenal was just, you know, that club that I just like, oh, that's a cool name. And I think that's how it started, if I remember correctly. I'm 37, so I try to remember my history, but and their nickname is the Gunners, and they started in, I believe it was like 1886, and from a guy called Woolwich Arsenal as an armament factory, and the winningest club in England when it comes to FA Cups, won the league, a handful of times, and you know the biggest thing that Arsenal kind of got famous for is they moved from South London to North London, and that's why one of the biggest reasons why Arsenal and Tottenham are such big rivals, because that's kind of like Tottenham's turf, if you will, and Arsenal came in, and I think that's the reason why. And I just love the name. I love the crest. The crest has a giant cannon on it, which is badass. And they had players like, obviously Thierry Henry, who's arguably one of the best strikers in the world, definitely in the Prem. Him and Alan Shearer, obviously Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney's up there, of course. But they had other players like Mark Overmars, Cesc Fabregas, Robin van Persie, Petr Cech played for Arsenal as well. And you got I don't know if I said Robert Pires, Dennis Bergkamp, all these different players. I was like, who are all these studs? And I just fell in love with the team. I love their style of play. I love what they did, and you know, I don't know how to explain it. And it's just I enjoyed what the clubs did. I enjoyed what they stood for. I like that. Fortunately, when I found them, they were actually in a winning era. Our
Mm,
last six, maybe 8 seasons have been pretty rough. Our last two and a half have been much better because we went from like eighth in the division to like, second and second. We're in second now this year, and that's how I fell in love with Arsenal. And I'll be a Gooner to the day I die. So, London's red.
well, and I'm sure that's a big decision because unlike, I feel like in the US, that there's a lot of bandwagon fans. There's a lot
Mm,
of fans that are more loyal to a player as opposed to a
right.
team. And there is not as much quote unquote loyalty to a specific
Mm.
team as there are in other sports. So I'm sure that when you chose Arsenal as your team, it felt like there was something inside of you that was like, I gotta stick with this. I can't switch or anything like that.
Yeah, watching players like, Thierry Henry, Bennett, like I said, Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Patrick Vieira, Robert Pires, hell, Ian Wright, obviously. These are just players that, you kind of just you sit up for, and you have a player that, that you just kind of catch you on the edge of the seat. Every time they get the ball, you're like, oh shit.
Something's going down.
And
Something's gonna
yeah,
happen.
and yeah, exactly. And another reason why I like, Arsenal too is I don't know how it is in other sports, uh, but and especially in Europe and especially in soccer and football in general, even here in the MLS, is that the clubs have academy teams. So you can be a 15-year-old player and play in the first team,
Mm.
right? You can have a 16-year-old player, right? Arsenal has two players, 17 and 18-year-old, that play in the first team. Like, what other sport can you do that? And these are players that, like, there's a kid that plays for Arsenal. His name is Max Dallman. He's an attacking midfielder, is what I would call him. And football, like in I think basketball too, the positions are based upon numbers. So like your strikers are number 9, your attacking mids are 10, so on and so forth. And he's 15, and people are just calling him, the next wonder kid. 15. It's just, and there's a lot of clubs that have kind of notorious, I don't say notorious, but historically have always had great academies. And that's what
Mhm.
makes football so different, right? Borussia Dortmund in Germany, right? One of the best out there, right? Christian Pulisic went through the Dortmund Academy, right? You got Arsenal, right? I think Southampton, all right? Obviously, they're the last of the division, but they have historically a very good academy program. Bayern Munich, obviously, Bayern Munich's a powerhouse, right? Barcelona. You're talking about bandwagoners. Yeah, I'll throw a little shade. Barcelona fans, bandwagoners. Real Madrid fans, bandwagon. I'm not taking anything away from those clubs. Those are very historical and prestigious clubs, obviously. How Barcelona is still operating today, I have no idea. They're worth like 2 billion, yet they have no money in the bank. I don't know how that works.
Right.
That's a whole nother show on its own. But it just adds more to the history, and it's fascinating. It really is.
So transitioning a little bit to, kind of just some of the bigger soccer stories or kind of just what's
Yeah.
going on around the world. Let's start with MLS because you you mentioned when we were chatting about recording this that you're not a huge MLS fan. And as somebody who, or I've only known you for a little while, and given how much you know and love about football, why would you be a fan of Major League Soccer when you have all of these other leagues around the world that are well established, have better talent, and have more exciting games? So,
Yeah, I would think that. I mean, I'm growing up in Houston. I'm gonna support my local teams.
mhm,
There's other people that support teams for various reasons, outside of the bandwagoners, whether they're from the city or their favorite player plays for them, or and there's various reasons, like, oh, I like their colors. Like at first, like I liked Arsenal because I like their crest and I like the name. That's how I got into it, to be
mhm,
honest.
yeah,
To be transparent, but I stuck with the club ever since I was, I don't know, 5.
right.
So, and the Dynamo came to Houston in 2006, 2005, 2006, when they left San Jose from the San Jose Earthquakes, and it was Dominic Kinnear at that time was the owner and moved them to Houston, and they won back-to-back cup championships, and they've won, the Open Cup a handful of times, but I'm not a fan of it just because I don't like the commercialism that millionaires have put into it. It very it's I don't want to say it's sickening because I think that's a strong word, but it's a little, it takes a little bit of the passion out of the game. And we kind of talked about it a little bit in the pre-show that the MLS is the only league in the professional leagues in the world for football that doesn't do promotion relegation system. Why that is, and it's for a number of reasons, which is what the MLS commissioners talked about. But you got to say the biggest reason is because of money.
Yep.
And the system, and I can explain the system, how it works, how the promotion relegation system works, but they're the only division that does it. It's real interesting. But like I said, I'm a big fan of Portland Timbers. Portland has a fantastic atmosphere. Dynamo always has, because Houston is a very cultural based city. We got a lot of Hispanics, a lot of different South American ethnicities and groups here, and it just adds more. When you go into the pub and like, oh yeah, I'm from here, you talk to people. We got Houston has a lot of English people, like traditional English, and a lot of English fans come over. So it's always nice to hear. It's just I feel like the league can do so much, but they're doing so less just because of commercialism.
Feels like American sports to a T to some extent
Sure.
or another. And it's funny because with MLS, it's expanding faster than pretty much any other sport in the US right now.
It's like
And
two teams per year, roughly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it you kind of feel like there is a little blood in the water in terms of all of these people trying to capitalize on making football, like, or as opposed to American football, very much a thing in the US. And I think they've made a lot of strides, and it's going to continue to grow as more and more people grow up with it. And I think that's one of the things that I find so exciting about MLS is they are expanding, they are growing, their popularity is continuing to grow, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And then the way that they attract talent from all over the world, it's kind of interesting because as an outsider looking in and as someone who doesn't see a whole lot of what's going on with football right now, I kind of feel like in a lot of ways MLS feels like a last stop for some people, and we're not always getting their best, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But kind of talk to me a little bit about the star power that's come through MLS, and has that even paid off for some of these clubs?
Yeah, MLS kind of got the last few years, maybe even like the last decade. MLS got known as the retirement league or the
Yeah.
coffin league. Some of the players that kind of started it, obviously Beckham was the big one with the LA Galaxy. And after that was Thierry Henry, who went to New York Red Bulls. And the list just makes itself, right? And then obviously you got Messi, who plays for Miami, which the whole Miami thing is interesting enough as it is, because the team joined the MLS, and I think it was 2020. We're talking about the commercialism of the game. It's 20 as of 2024. So 2 year or 4 years, the team is worth over $1 billion. How is that?
Yeah.
It's just the commercialism of it. It's just nuts. Do I think it worked? Yes, but I think it's working for the wrong reasons.
Mhm.
Because, like I said, I think it takes the passion and the I don't say the fun, but it takes the passion out of the game. And I don't really appreciate it. And I think that's why. I mean, I can go into the weeds about this, but this is why so many American players, choose to play overseas. It's one of
Yeah.
the reasons. One, and obviously, you got atmosphere, and the training's better and the culture around the sport, of course. But it's just I would argue that the commercialism of the game has kind of ruined everything. And there's pundits that like Alexi Lawless, and say what you want about Alexi Lawless for Fox Sports, but I think he's with Fox Sports, and Stuart Holden's one of another one who I like Stuart, but they kind of said that they wanted Christian Pulisic to play in the MLS, and they just both got torched. And like Christian Pulisic plays for AC Milan, one of the most historical clubs in the world, AC Milan, right? And he's played in the match. That's this one right here. Not
Mhm.
obviously in this photo, but in the derby. So why would he leave that to play FC Dallas versus Seattle Sounders. Like
Right, right.
why would he it's baffling, sponsorships aside or whatever. That's just wild. And I would love to see the numbers on Messi's contract. Apparently, he's got ownership rights and all sorts of stuff, which is nuts. Name another player that's got that sort of power. And and we could dive into the whole MLS and Houston and whole Messi thing that happened this past week, but it's just I say this about Star Wars because I'm a big Star Wars fan. I will always watch it because I'm a fan, right? But there's TV shows of Star Wars that I hated, right? Acolyte, terrible, absolute crap, right? But I still watch it because I'm still a fan of the game. I'm still a fan of the movies and everything. And if there's this game on, I'll watch it, but I'm like, man, this is crap. You can, and just by watching it, and this isn't the bad mouth the teams or the players or anything. It's just watch an MLS game. Watch the best teams in MLS play each other. Then go watch the worst teams
It's
and in the Premiership play each other. It's night and day, not even close.
you can't compare the two because it's a talent. It's
Yeah.
what it boils down to a couple things. It boils down to talent. It boils down to, you know, the dollars that can be invested in training, better facilities, and it just kind of boils down to that there's just not as much interest here in football as opposed to all the other sports that people can play where they could probably make more money, become more famous, or as you mentioned before, if an American is that talented at soccer, they're probably going to go overseas because better competition, better training, and they're going there to play the best of the best.
If you want,
It's just the truth of the matter.
if you ask any soccer coach that's worth their knowledge, they'll tell you to play overseas.
Yeah.
100%. That's the best way to do it. Even college players, if they have the opportunity to go play in the MLS or the USL or whatever it is, good for them. But the competition is across the pond.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
For sure. So before we get to some of those leagues across the pond and what's going on with their season, any thoughts on kind of the continued rise of women's soccer, particularly in the US or just kind of around the world? Any thoughts there?
So I'm a big fan of the women's game as a whole. I don't follow it, thanks to Megan Rapinoe. So, and her agenda, what it is. She's a great player, but she's definitely fallen off her passion for the game. Put politics aside, but she's entitled to believe and say what she wants to believe. That's her her mission or whatever. But I haven't seen the numbers, but the women's division is also they've grown. A lot more sponsorships are happening. There's different class action lawsuits about equal pay and stuff like that. I really don't, as a whole, I don't really agree with equal pay. I agree more of you should be paid for what you're worth and what you do. And there's a lot of, I have a sports management background, and economics and statistics don't lie. That's the reason why the U.S. men's world with the men's World Cup and the women's World Cup is paid differently. It's because it's economics and statistics. It's that simple.
Mhm.
Do I hope the women's game grows? Absolutely. Women's soccer is super fun to watch. And sometimes it's actually much more aggressive because they have more to prove and stuff like that. But the U.S. women's team has a lot to prove because they got absolutely manhandled in the last World Cup. They barely made it out of the groups, and from there it was just a fiasco because of all the internal politics that were going on and everything. And but they should be doing much better because they have a new coach, which is Emma Hayes, who came over from Chelsea, which is in the women's Premiership in England. So now we have you know top tier coaches from other leagues, excuse me, coming over to coach our national team. And this is a national team that has so much pedigree. Like historically speaking, we had Abby Wambach. It's just you had players that were just so. Abby Wambach was so fun to watch because she just towered over people and she was dominant, just like a thug in the box. Like You remember like Shaq back in the day, where Shaq
Yeah.
would just beat the piss
Just
out of someone? Yeah,
lead people.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you wanted players like that, especially in football, where you want a player like that that just is just a punk in the box. You want players like that, and it just seems that the last few years they've lost that dog, that
Mm,
dog in the fight. And that's for a number of different reasons. The biggest reason was, at least on a lot of the sports chatter I've seen, was the internal politics of what was going on. And part of it was the exterior recruiting that to replace the aging players that were already in the team was also skewed as well, whatever. So, but I'm all here for it. I think that the other women's teams and other leagues and countries have definitely caught up to the women's team. I forgot the statistic, but how long the U.S. teams has been ranked number one. The women's team has been ranked number one. It's something wild. But I would argue, the women's division, right? It's the NWSL versus the SL, which the WSL is in England. You got Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal, all the teams that we just mentioned all have women's teams as well.
right.
So, like Emily Fox plays for the U.S. Women's National Team. Guess who she plays for? She plays for Arsenal. She's a outside left back or right back. So, you know, it's just you want more. I feel
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's like, especially with how the last World Cup played out. Yeah, there's definitely expectations up there that were not met and changes need to be made. So we'll continue to monitor that, see how that pans out. Let's move on to, I'm sure, things that you're more excited to talk about, which is let's just start with the English Premier League. Since you're a fan of Arsenal and Arsenal's in the English Premier League. So why don't we start with this? How far into the English Premier League season is it right now, or what's going on there, and how has Arsenal been this season?
so majority of teams have played either 27 to 28 games roughly, and that's just and it is. I think it'd be fair to say that most teams play in roughly, at least the top teams. We'll say probably just for the sake of numbers, the top 10. Actually, that's not even true. A good amount of the teams, I'll just leave it kind of a gray area. The good amount of the teams playing upwards of 3 to 4 tournaments per year,
Mhm.
right? You have the league, and which is already enough strenuous as it is, right? And then teams play in the FA Cup, they play in the Champions League, Europa League, depending on your placement, stuff like that. So there's a lot of games. There's a game, there's I think rough numbers is there's 3 games every 10 days, something like that. Depending, obviously, if you're playing Champions League or whatever, you're playing one Champions League game a week, and then you're playing your league game in the weekend, and then that just repeats itself. Whether it's a Wednesday, Thursday, or Saturday, Sunday. So we're 28 in. Liverpool has the advantage right now. They're 27-1, so they're definitely the team to beat. Arsenal is pretty rough. We've had a couple of rough go arounds. We play Manchester United this weekend. We should get by them, but it's not easy for us because we lost our entire front line. Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli, and Kai Havertz all went out on injury. And then
Mhm.
our second line striker, Gabriel Jesus, got injured as well. So our reserve striker and all three of our starters are all out. So, we're playing with all essentially, our subs, which leaves, we don't have any subs. We just have like our B team essentially as our subs, if you will. But the league is very interesting, like Manchester City this year dropped off a cliff. This is the
Mhm.
team that won the treble, and three cups in a single year. That's ridiculous, right?
Mhm.
And you want to talk about even nuttier stuff, like Tottenham Hotspur, right? Considered a top 6 club, what's called the Big Six in the Prem, right? Don't know why they've never won a cup, yet they're considered a Big Six team. They're 13th. Manchester United, right? The Manchester United, 14th,
Mhm.
14th. Like it's nuts. Like Manchester United, just looking at rough numbers here, 2 wins in the last 5. So it's and then obviously you got Ipswich and Leicester City and Southampton cleaning up the bottom of the table. But yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. I think that if Arsenal want to do, I speak for Arsenal because I'm an Arsenal fan. If Arsenal want to do well, they have to maintain upwards trajectory. And not only that, if it does get close, we have to maintain our goal difference. Because in soccer, the goal difference matters. A lot of people don't know that. And I can kind of explain it more, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Because I'm assuming goal difference would have to do with the more goals you score, then, well, no, actually, I'm not even going to try to think about it. Explain to me what
sure,
exactly goal difference is.
sure. So I'll give it my best try. I'll
Okay.
probably get butchered in the comments by all the English fans, but um, stupid American, blah, 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 whatever. I'm a fan, all right, so I'll take it. Anyways, now I'll dish it out too. Bring it. So I'll banter aside. So essentially, football is based on points, right? A win is 3 points, a draw or a tie is 1 point per team, and a loss is zero, right? So say, Arsenal and Liverpool play this weekend, Arsenal wins, Arsenal gets 3 points, Liverpool gets zero, right? And those points compound and they add up, and whoever has the most points at the end of the season wins the title. There's no playoff. So that's how it works. So but you might say, well, if Liverpool and Arsenal both have, say, for the sake of numbers, 90 points at the end of the season, but Arsenal has more goals scored and less goals received versus Liverpool, they win the cup. And it's fascinating. It's pretty cool. And there's a lot of numbers that go into it, like, clean sheets and stuff like that. The clean sheet just means, 1-0, 1-0 goal, there's no goal scored on the goalkeeper essentially. And so, and to go into even more, the top four clubs that place in the division, the top four go to what's called the Champions League, which essentially is another tournament. It's kind of like the World Cup, or well, that's not true. There's a thing called the Club World Cup, but there's another thing called the Champions League, which is every year. All the teams for all the top four teams, sometimes three, depending on the league, play in the Champions League, and that kind of crowns the best team in Europe. Yeah, and then to go into promotion relegation, which is kind of an interesting topic. This is my biggest argument why football is better than American football. Is that and when I tell this to a lot of American football fans, it just blows their mind. They're like, "What? They do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, hell yeah, they do that." So essentially, what happens is that so there's 20 teams in the top division, right? In the Premiership. The top the top four, right, go in the Champions League, whatever, right? The last three, so 18, 19, and 20, get relegated. Hence promotion relegation, relegated into the second division, and the top three teams from the second division get promoted into the top division. That's essentially the same as having you have three new teams promoted into the top division every single year, and three new teams go back to the second division every single year. So you have new competition every single year. Imagine your AAA team, right? Whoever, like, what's your team? What's your MLB team?
The Chicago Cubs.
All right, so Cubbies, right? What's the Cubs AAA team? Do you know?
No, off the top of my
Yeah.
head, I do not.
So
But
say that's my example. So say you have a AAA team that plays in the MLB next year.
yeah,
It's the exact same, essentially. And what other sport can you do that, right?
yeah,
There's teams,
dare,
that you have to walk through people's living rooms to get to your seat. Like how, like what?
well, dare I say that isn't that more like that's a huge incentive to be good all the time versus what a lot of other sports do, which is
Yeah.
you get the prospect of drafting like a really good player, or hey, you
Yes.
could you could still suck, but you're gonna get a shitload of money, and that's good enough for us. And that's terrible, but I think there is something there with promotion and relegation. Dare I say, like maybe a hot take, that's never gonna fly in the US. And that sucks because I think if globally, if people want to take MLS more seriously, they eventually have to go to that as a way to standardize the game across like what the rest of the world does. And if there's no incentive for your team to
Yeah.
excel, and more importantly, I think that punishment and that stick of relegation that stings a lot. And I'm sure that to to get relegated, it's a blow to the ego. It's probably a little embarrassing, and also it gives you that motivation to, hey, get your ass in gear and let's start to get better in order for us to get promoted. So I guess let me ask you this. And you mentioned Welcome to Wrexham. I watched the first couple seasons of that. Really enjoyed it. It's a fun story, even though it gives off like, hey, these two Hollywood actors are just going to come in and just try to save this historic club. But where was Wrexham before? Like what level league, and where are they now?
Man, you put me on the spot. I couldn't tell you that. I
Mhm.
could tell you, I can look it up and then break it down for you. So Wrexham is plays in the third plays in all right, so they play in the third division right now. They're third in Football League One. So they play in Football League One, which is like two, if not three, below the Premiership. But they're third in the League One. So I don't know if League One promotes the first two or the first three, but as of now, they'll get promoted.
Right.
But just think about it this way: we're talking about promotion and relegation. You have these teams that are down here at the bottom that are going to get dropped down. You know what I mean? Like it's just wild.
So I looked it up according to the internet, and so I guess I got to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. When Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney purchased Wrexham, they played in the National League, which is the fifth tier of the English football system. So way below the Premier League and just three tiers below that. So for them to get promoted a couple of times to get to a better league, good for them for that. And
Back-to-back promotions never happened. Well,
yeah,
sorry, the third promotions never happened.
yeah.
So
So,
they'll
so
make history if they do it.
yeah, so that's exciting because to some extent or another for sport, like American sports, for example, don't we get a little tired of the same team like just constantly winning all the time? And after that point, what else do we have to cheer for? If like Kansas City, for example, the Chiefs for American football, they would have been one of the first, I think, the first team to win three Super Bowls in a row. Like, okay, once they do that, where else is there to go? Nowhere. So this promotion and relegation system would be super exciting and would be interesting. But again, for US sports, there's just too much money involved and there's just too much greed out there, and that sucks.
Imagine the Browns playing in the Canadian Football League.
They'd still get smoked because the Browns suck. They're terrible.
Was it
So
they went what? Oh, it was it 0 and 16 that one
mm,
year, or was that the Chicago Bears?
Browns did it, and then the Lions did it.
Okay.
So it's only happened twice, but yeah, it hasn't been a good go of things for the Cleveland Browns for a long time. So how much longer is there for the Arsenal or for the English Premier League season? And what do you think their prospects are, or Arsenal's prospects are for the rest of the season?
So I think that Arsenal's prospects are the biggest thing that Arsenal has a problem with is that they didn't have a what's called a true number nine, so a true striker. This is your, Erling Haalands, this is your Kylian Mbappe, so on and so forth. Kai Havertz isn't a true nine by trade. Technically, he's more of a midfield utility player, but he has played in that solo striker role before. But Arsenal fans have been screaming for a true striker to come in for probably the last two seasons. There's a massive failure this past year on Arsenal because we also have what's called trade windows. You have a trade window in the summer, which is about 3 months long, roughly, and then you have a trade window in January, right? When I say trade window, it's technically called a transfer window. Essentially, players can get bought out, buy the contracts out, so it's all sorts of stuff. This is kind of the standard. Players that are out of contracts, teams that can buy out contracts. There's also like sell-on clauses that a lot of teams add on to players to make a little bit more money. Usually it's upwards of the millions. We're talking 40, 50, 60 million. That's just to have permission to talk to the player. There's all sorts of rules that goes into it. But Arsenal failed to do that for a number of different reasons. I don't know why. And then three, and then including their backup striker, all got hurt. So Arsenal's playing with a makeshift front three. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 games left. I think we would win probably 8 of those. Liverpool away is going to be hard, right? Anfield, very historical stadium. Right, number 1 versus number 2. That'd be a good game. Bournemouth is the team of the season so far when it comes to surprises. Them and Nottingham Forest playing absolutely fantastic. No one saw them coming, and they're both pushing for qualification for Europe. All the other ones I think will do fine. Everton away is going to be a hard game, a very hostile environment, but I think we'll do all right. But I think what Arsenal's biggest problem is consistency and predictability. I've said it on my show a handful of times that Arsenal's problem is they're too predictable. This is getting into the weeds, but they're known for playing makeshift formations from typically a 4-3-3 into a 3-5-2 roughly, or it's just weird because how they play, they push their midfielders so far forward that it's almost they have a front 5, which what that means is if defenses have a back 4, they're down a man. So essentially it takes another player out of their midfield to drop back, which makes the midfield more open. That also makes the defense more compact. So there's different pros and cons to that. But Arsenal was notorious for spreading the ball wide, to playing their wings wide, which creates width, which makes the front of the middle of the field open. But it was so predictable, like teams would just defensive overload on the wings and then double up, and then either you lose the ball or you play the ball back and you have to reset, kind of like in basketball where you call your play, and if it doesn't work, you reset and try again. It's the same concept. So Arsenal got so predictable that, teams were starting to figure it out. And then, players like, Odegaard, who is my favorite player, who's left-footed, it's just, they're so predictable that, they always push them to the left because, they know they're left-footed, but they know that players aren't informed, so they'll do it anyways. And there's other players that will, like in basketball, players that will take 1 or 2 more, 3 more steps before they shoot. It's the same concept. You're begging a player to pull the trigger, they shoot the ball or whatever, and then they take 5, 6, 7 more steps, and then they lose possession, right? Again, in the weeds, Sterling is notorious for this. I don't know why Arsenal bought him in the transfer window. He hasn't done anything in ages. He's very, very gifted player and very, he's got a lot of trophies and everything, but he hasn't done anything in ages. He doesn't have a goal for us. Anything is a handful of assists, but he just kind of fills a role at the moment. But I think if Arsenal if they do well against Man United away, which are our next game, and then we got a London derby against Chelsea, and then we kind of have a little bit of makeshift competition, I think we'll do fine.
So I'd be remiss not to at least ask a little bit about the World Cup, because I know that the World Cup isn't happening this year. Next one's what, next year? It's in the US. It's in the US, right? Or just specific?
US, Canada, and Mexico.
Got it. So anything to kind of be on the lookout for, like any teams in particular that you're excited to see in the World Cup?
I would say the US obviously would be interesting because we're hosting. Countries that host get an automatic bid into the World Cup, so they don't have to play qualifiers.
So all 3 of them would get in?
Correct.
Oh,
correct. And the World Cup has also expanded into more teams. So it's just, it'd be interesting. Let's see, right now, USA's ranked, looks like 16th in the world. That's kind of low, to be honest, I think. But I would say Argentina is going to be the favorite, obviously. I wouldn't be surprised if England do well. England had an absolute terrible time in the Euros. There's a team that it's so funny, and the story with England is wild because they had my numbers could be skewed here, but they had six players worth over a million or 100. Yeah, six players that are worth over 100 million. But the club or the England team itself was worth over $1 billion. Yet they couldn't perform.
Ooh.
Yeah, they were getting goals and getting results, but they couldn't perform. It was like you have Jude Bellingham, right? Plays for Barcelona. Harry Kane plays for Bayern Munich. Bukayo Saka plays for Arsenal. Declan Rice plays at Arsenal. Phil Foden plays for Manchester City. You have all these different teams, all these different players that play for, the Three Lions, which that's their nickname, and yet they're struggling for goals. Trent Alexander-Arnold, probably one of the best right backs in the world, plays for Liverpool, and they had him playing in a makeshift wing back slash defensive midfielder because they wanted him to push higher. He doesn't play that position, but they want him to be involved. And same thing with Bukayo Saka. Bukayo Saka got pushed into a left back role, a right back role, when he's traditionally a forward winger. It's interesting. It would be interesting to see what they have. So much so that they fired their manager, and they got a new manager, which is historic, which is pretty funny because for the first time ever, England hasn't had an English manager. They have a German manager by the name of Thomas Tuchel. And I think Brazil will be interesting. The fall of Neymar has been a very intriguing story. I don't know if you saw the stat about him playing in Saudi Arabia, played 2 games, played about total of 45 minutes and made, something like $250 million, and he played
Yeah.
45 minutes.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds about right for a lot of players that play for
yeah,
Saudi-backed teams.
yeah. So I think that'd be interesting. Obviously, I'm gonna root for, my brethren in Italy. Germany is also a very good team to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if USA do very well, especially in groups. But teams that are always fun to watch, Japan. I've been saying this for 20 years, and my friend Tyler will back me up. But Japan is one of the funnest teams to watch. That and their fans are fantastic. They're one of those teams where every team gives it their all, blood, sweat, and tears. They do the kiss the crest, to show respect. But Japan is just a team you're just like, you just love to watch them, and they have beautiful, absolutely beautiful kits, or jerseys.
Yeah.
Their nickname's called the Blue Samurai.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised, if other teams like Korea, maybe even Sweden, do decent. But it's an expanded
Field this year.
field this year, so it'll be interesting to see. Not a lot of African teams, and let's see. There's no Senegal is 17th, very good team to watch, and Nigeria historically is a very good team to watch. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Also, one thing to remember here is that there's 3 time zones here in the States, right?
Or there's
So
four. There's four.
4, yeah,
Yep, and that's not if you don't include Alaska and Hawaii,
right,
which that would
right,
be 5 and 6. But
right.
in the US, continental US, yeah, 4.
Right. Yeah. So imagine, a game in, I got to look up where the stadiums are at again, but New York, and then a game in, LA, or, for example, and not only that, there's a lot of different climates here in the States
It's
that a lot of these players have to get used to. Not to mention, the Azteca Stadium in Mexico, which is I think it's something upwards of 6,000 feet above elevation. I'm sure that's wrong, but
that sounds
the
about right. It's pretty high up there.
the
And
breathing is completely different.
yeah,
So
well,
it'd be interesting how players from, Portugal adjust to
adjust
that,
to things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So, Kyle, last question I have for you before I get you out of here. So, you've been passionate and you love soccer and you've been or football and you have been following it for a long time. For anybody that's on the fence about football or someone like me who's just looking for an entry point, what do you say to them? And what advice could you kind of give somebody who, I guess in a way, sell me football.
Oh man, so I haven't done it already, so I guess I'm
No, no,
I
no.
need to
This,
practice more.
this this is definitely not me saying that you have not sold me on it.
Sure.
But for anybody who's looking for, just give give your quick elevator pitch about why why someone should get into football.
For me, it's kind of like what I was talking about what the sport does.
Mhm.
I think, and excuse me. So like if you watch like shows like Welcome to Wrexham, that shows a lot of, what the club means to the town and what the town means to the club.
Yeah.
And for the show, and I like the show, it rings true a lot. Like the race course stadium, I think it's the oldest professional stadium in the world, or like or oldest operating stadium in the world, something of that nature, right? And then obviously you got a little bit more of the wild ones like Ted Lasso, which is, I haven't seen a lot of Ted Lasso, which I get a lot of flack for. There's also other ones like the English Game. The English Game is really good, and if you watch some of that stuff like that, you kind of get a glimpse of what the sport is. But what I would do if someone that was this, entering into the sport, I would say, find a friend that watches it. I would say that's the best thing, and then just tag along. Honestly, that's the best thing. It's going to be a little bit of a fire hose effect because you're going to be talking about players and formations and transitions and overloads and positional numbers, all sort like different fouls. Like why is a foul a yellow card and not a red card, and different like the last man rule and all sorts of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But I would just say, if you have any history with any part of that part of the world,
Mhm.
support that club. That's usually how most of the stuff happens.
Right.
You look up your ancestry. Oh, my family's from Germany. All from Bayern. Okay, well, there's a few clubs in Bayern, and Bayern Leverkusen, Bayern Munich, and okay, cool. And then like I said, I liked Arsenal because they were just called Arsenal. It sounds like a badass name. It's like Arsenal. Okay, cool. And they have a freaking cannon on their crest. That's pretty cool. And I think that's the best way to do it. And just find out when they play. Unfortunately, this is kind of the kicker, is that the Premiership is played on 3 different apps or service providers. So in order to see all the games, you have to have probably 3, if not 4 different service providers, whether it's, Peacock, which is what it's mostly on, or USA Network. Then you have other ones like Paramount Plus, which has Champions League, and there's a few other ones as well. But that's what I would say I would do. I mean, you can go into it even so much as like, what's your favorite color? Right, red. Okay, just looking at the top 10 teams here, there's 4 teams that have red colors. I
Mhm.
mean, or I mean, I would say look at it like teams that have great history. Okay, Newcastle has fantastic history. St. James Park, one of the best stadiums and one of the most ferocious stadiums to play at for an opponent. A very hostile stadium, right? Everton, very hostile stadium. Manchester United, one of the most prestigious soccer clubs in the world, right? Name the Red Devils. How cool is that? Just
Mhm.
something simple like that. Just don't support. You can support anyone you want, And I have friends that support little old teams like Hull City, like just it really doesn't matter who you support, and just prepare with soccer, football, there's a lot of banter in the sport. So
Mhm.
if there's casual fans and there's passionate fans, and excuse me, and there's fans that take it too far, obviously. But banter is part of the game,
Mhm.
and you can ignore stuff all you want, but you know, if you're gonna dish it, you got to be able to take it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So, but yeah, I'm more than happy to talk to anyone that's looking for a team.
Okay. Well, good to know. And because one of the most common criticisms that I see about football is it's boring. And for all those people who say it's boring, you're wrong. Because there's always something going on in the game. And it's
Have they
for
seen
me,
baseball?
well, have you seen football? Like just
Right.
like American football as well, where hey, you gotta reset the chains and gotta get the play and gotta set up
Yeah,
the formation and there's a lot of downtime. Whereas something like just prop or like football, they're constantly going. There's constantly plays going on, and it's a continuous thing. So
yeah.
I
Clock never
don't
stops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't agree with anybody that says that the game is boring. And I think I think the big thing, like you said, is that you just gotta find your team, and you just gotta kind of dive in and just try it out, because even if you don't want to support an English Premier League team, there are tons of other teams around the world that you could, and tons of other leagues that you could follow that can get you invested in the game. So, Kyle, solid advice, and I really appreciate your time and chatting with you about football, and looking forward to chatting with you more on that. So, where can the people find you if they want to keep up the conversation? And do you have anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me again. So I would love check out. So I got the Inside the 90 podcast, which is mine. You find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Inside the 90. We talk all things soccer culture, history, news. We even have trivia, all sorts of stuff. Super fun. Have a great panel. Different coaches, fans that have crazy stories. And then also we have 90 Apparel. So 90apparel.shop is our website. And if you need something, send me a message, send me an email. And yeah, I love to chat. Always looking for guests and panel members.
All right, sounds good. So I'll be sure to put all of those links on our episode notes so that people can check you out. So, Kyle, again, appreciate your time. Looking forward to chatting with you more soon.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this episode of Sportsball. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website at spdmcrew.com. Shout out to HiFlyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any marketing, logo, or brand standard needs, contact them at HiFlyerCreative.com. Check out the other shows on our network. So if you're looking for shows on movies, TV, comic books, physical media, we got all of those in spade. We are getting ready to launch a couple more coming up soon. So check out the other shows on our network. And finally, if you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM Crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever.